All right, welcome everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from today. We thought that we'd kick things off just a minute early here, given that we do have a great group already online with us, and ask, where is everyone tuning in from? Let us know in the chat panel there on the bottom right. I think on our team of panelists here today, are we all based in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver or around that area? Sinai, I know you're...
Yeah, some BC, some Alberta, I think.
Yeah. I'm in Calgary.
And I'm in Edmonton.
Yeah, and I'm in Lower Mainland near Vancouver.
Me too. Very cool. What's the weather like in the other for you guys, Sinai and Matt?
It's hovering around 30 today.
Yeah, about the same. Nice and toasty.
Yeah, pretty warm.
Yeah, we got some competition then. We were the warm weather ones over here first. And then swapped to you.
We're happy to share the wealth when it comes to this heat, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Looks like we have a good group here, some from Europe, the States, Canada. Awesome. Well, yeah, keep letting us know in the chat panel there where you're tuning in from. And with that, it is 8 a.m. So I think we are good to go ahead and kick things off. I'll pass things over to the team.
Great. Welcome, everybody. We're here today for our Hook, Line, and Sinker Reeling in ArcGIS Webhooks webinar, and we're happy to see all of you here today. I guess we can get started with a couple intros here. So my name's Dan. I'm one of the technical support specialists at Safe Software, and I deal mostly with the FME desktop side, helping new users get started with FME. And today I'm joined by...
My name's Sinai. I have a very similar role, except for mainly dealing with the FME server product.
And my name is Matt. I'm also dealing with the FME server product on Sinai's team, but newer addition to the team.
And Matt, is this your first webinar with us at SAFE?
It is.
Well, congratulations on your first
Nice.
webinar. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
All right, thanks team. And we also do have a team of experts in the back end this morning here, ready and available to answer any questions that you may have come up during the webinar. So definitely just a reminder to leave those in the questions panel as we go. Awesome. And before we dive into things, I'll just do a quick intro to Livestorm if this is your first Livestorm webinar with us. If you do have any audio issues, we have that handy help button on the bottom left. Share your reactions with us during the webinar. We love to see them. And then there's also the questions tab on the bottom right. Ask your questions and upvote questions that are relevant to you. And then that helps us prioritize which ones to get to first. And then last but not least, the chat. Keep letting us know where you're tuning in from and share your comments with us there. I believe we also have a poll shortly that we'll bring up under that polls tab as well.
Great. And just a quick agenda of what we're going to be looking at today through our webinar. We're going to do a quick introduction to webhooks and what webhooks are. We'll be looking at a quick flash demo to give you a preview of what we're going to be working with today and kind of a sneak peek. Then we'll dive into a bit of a Survey123 Webhooks demonstration and how you can use FME to empower that, as well as looking at Field Map and the webhooks there. And then we'll end off with some resources and some Q&A. So I think at this point, we'll turn off our cameras to save some bandwidth. So just a quick overview of our company, Safe Software, if you're not familiar with us. We've been around for over 28 years, solving data challenges, and we're a leader in enterprise spatial data integration. So our mission is to help maximize the value of data and get all that data and have it performing to the best of its ability. We have over 16,000 organizations that trust us worldwide. We're in over 128 countries, and we've got a very vibrant FME community where you can find lots of answers and ask questions and come up with new ideas. And this is our FME Enterprise Integration Platform. And today, of course, we're going to be working with FME Desktop to author those workflows. And then we'll be publishing those up to FME Server and working with automations to get those webhooks flowing freely. And with FME comes unrivaled data support. So over the years, we started out with GIS and CAD, and now we've moved up to AI, VR. And with webhooks, really, you could be working with any of these different formats. So there's lots of possibilities of what you could be working with here. And a quick poll for everyone today is, what Esri web apps are you currently using? So I know we've already mentioned Field Maps, Survey123. There's also custom web apps, collectors. Let us know in the polls.
Yeah, and then if you aren't using any, we do have an option for none at the moment as well. Maybe I'll ask our panelists here while we're waiting. What would you guys expect the most to be for our results today?
Collector seems to be quite a popular one, though maybe Survey123 is a close second.
Yeah, I think Collector and Survey123 are probably going to be the highest ones here, but we'll see what we get.
Yeah, not to be boring, but those would be my choices as well.
We're probably on to something then.
All right, awesome. It looks like most people have voted, and everyone can take a look at the results there on the bottom right under polls now.
Great. So a challenge faced by ArcGIS Online users is how to enrich, manipulate, and sync that ArcGIS Online data in near real time with other systems. Webhooks are a powerful tool to help address that challenge. So using webhooks, FME Server can run an automation within moments of an event occurring in ArcGIS Online. Webhooks provide that instant approach to be able to sync data faster and a little bit better than the typical data synchronization processes where you'd be potentially only viewing a snapshot of data in time. So I'm just going to go through a flash demo here of a water leak reporting example. So this is going to be a citizen in the city of Safeville, or fictional city, reporting a water leak outside of their property or a water leak they notice on the street using Safeville's Survey123 reporting app. And that's going to fire off a Survey123 webhook that will kick off an FME server automation and create a feature in a work order ArcGIS Online feature service. And that feature service is going to be used by our Field Maps work orders application. And the creation of that feature fires another webhook, this time an ArcGIS Online webhook, that'll trigger another FME server automation to notify the water department manager, who could then go into into Field Maps or into the ArcGIS Online web map and assign the work. And that update will trigger the same automation again. So I'm going to go through this now, jump into Survey123. Hopefully my audio is not too glitchy. Apologize if it is. To show you here in the settings for Survey123, I've already created this FME server webhook, so we'll go into more details in this later in the webinar, but this is a URL pointing to our webhook trigger in our automation. And this is set up to trigger when new records are submitted. So I'm just going to back out here, and I'm going to submit a survey. Pretend I'm the citizen. To save some time, I've defaulted all these fields. Essentially, the forms just the citizen's contact info, a description of the leak, and then they can put a pin on the map of where they found the problem. So I'll submit that, and we'll see right after submitting. I'm going to hop into FME server and go into this water leak reporting automation, which I'll come back to. If I go to the log file right away, you'll see in the log file, this is the raw data from the webhook. So we see the name of the person and the phone number, all the raw JSON data that was submitted with that Survey123 form. So it's very fast. And this automation fires off once it gets that webhook payload, fires off an FME desktop workspace that's going to create the create the feature in ArcGIS Online. So it looks like this. It gets the JSON data, does some fragmenting, and then creates a point geometry with attributes using that webhook data. It also enriches the data a bit to add some additional fields used for work order tracking. and then it writes that feature out to our ArcGIS Online Work Orders feature service. So the creation of that feature in ArcGIS Online actually fires another webhook, the one that I was showing earlier in the diagram. This one here, it's work order assignment. And so if I go look at the log file here, we'll see very different looking payloads been received, because the Survey123 and the ArcGIS Online Webhooks function a little differently. But this payload has triggered our automation to send an email to the assignee that was determined in FME Desktop. So if I just open up my email quickly just to prove that, I heard a ding in the background as I was talking. Just wanted to show the email that I received. This is sent by the automation. So we can see here's the fields that were added by FME Desktop to the work order feature. And then we also have the original data that was submitted by Survey123 for reference. So our water manager could go into the web map, either in Field Maps mobile app, or for ease of demo, I'm going to just go into the Field Maps app on the browser here. And we can see the point geometry has been created by the automation running that first workspace I showed. Go in and edit this point. The fields at the top were added by the workspace, so we've enriched our data, and the fields lower down were copied over from the Survey123 form to form our work order. Could update this to assigned as notes. And update, and within another 20 or 30 seconds, I'll get another email. But I'll end it there, since we're having a bit of sound issues here that I apologize for, and I'll pass it back. But that's hopefully we were able to get I was able to get the gist of some of the power of webhooks through, and the instantaneous nature of them.
Thank you, Matt, for that flash demo. I think that gives us a really good idea of how we can connect applications together and move our data within our workflows using ArcGIS Online Webhooks and FME Server. Now I just wanted to talk about some more reasons about why you should be using webhooks in the first place. So first off, if you're not already automating workflows between your applications, then you absolutely should be. FME allows you to connect multiple applications and data formats, with webhooks just being one of the tools available to do that. But as far as integration tools go, webhooks are a very lightweight option. They can connect between many systems without a lot of overhead. They require little to no custom coding or specialized knowledge really beyond this webinar. And they're really going to provide only limited access to each system, so they're quite a secure option as well. Lastly, webhooks deliver their data between systems nearly in real time. So that means that you can build automated workflows that respond to new data as it becomes available. And this has a huge benefit and allows for a lot of possibilities. And during this webinar, I definitely encourage everyone to maybe think about their own workflows, whether that is for processing data or maybe even work management, and how they might be automated with webhooks and FME Server. So what actually is a webhook? If you're familiar with REST API, you basically already know how webhooks work. Each communicate over the web using HTTP, but webhooks are much more simple. It's basically just a URL, and we use that URL in a post or GET request, and we can share that URL with another application that then can send data or event information to it. So what this means is that we no longer have to ask for that data from that application on a schedule or something like that. The other application can give us the data when it becomes available. And once we have that webhook connected to an FME server automation, we can set up a workflow to respond to that incoming event. So this is a lot like being able to hire a concierge for your data. It's a bit of a luxury. As soon as an event happens, it's taken care of. The webhook trigger makes it really easy to connect other applications to an FME server automation. So every webhook trigger is going to supply a URL, and we can set up that URL in another application to send a message every time certain events happen. So our FME server automation will then receive that message, and that automation workflow will be kicked off with the information contained in there. And the rest of that workflow is really going to be up to you. You can take that data, transform it, integrate it with another platform, send yourself a notification, maybe update a database. That's where the possibilities are really endless. So we just wanted to include a little primer on JSON in case you're not familiar with it, because we see a lot of it when we're working with webhooks or really any kind of web-based workflow. JSON is the most common data exchange format, and there's a little sample of it here. If you look past all of those brackets and colons and formatting, it's really just a dictionary that is describing the data. Both FME Server and Workbench have tools for extracting exactly what you need to know from that JSON. And inside of automations, we can parse JSON directly from webhook messages to use as parameters. And then inside of FME Workbench, we can do all kinds of JSON transformations to make that data usable. And we have a lot of tutorials for doing just that. So now that we're familiar with the fundamentals of webhooks, I'm happy to say that both ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Portal support these kinds of workflows. The configuration and availability does differ between and within each platform, but what they share in common is that we can use webhooks to monitor activity on our hosted items, users, and groups. This makes webhooks a fantastic tool for administrators, technicians, analysts to integrate and transform all of the ArcGIS data and metadata, as well as building out these workflows for between applications and potentially administrative tasks as well. So let's jump into our first webhook demo, and we can look at a Survey123 webhook with Dan.
Thanks, Sinai. Yeah, so for our first demonstration here, we're going to be looking at how we can use Survey123 webhooks and how we can really enhance them with FME Server. So if you're not familiar, Survey123 is an ArcGIS platform that allows users to submit surveys either from their mobile device or their web device. And this could range from surveys sourcing data from the public, or it could be used internally within your organization. So the goal today with Survey123 webhooks and FME Server is to sync data submitted through that Survey123 app to our SQL Server table and a Tableau dashboard. So some of the obstacles along the way, well, we don't really have a direct way to connect Survey123 data to our data destinations. So that's where our solution comes in place, which is FME Server automations and that webhook trigger that allows us to retrieve a webhook message and sync it to SQL Server and Tableau every single time a survey is submitted. The result is an always up-to-date data set and a dashboard for all the data submitted through the Survey123 app. And here's a quick overview of kind of the workflow that we're going to be working with today. So on the left, you can see we have our Survey123 app. And when the user submits a survey, it'll trigger a webhook payload that'll be sent to our FME Server automation through that webhook trigger. And that will kick off a workspace, which will then digest that webhook payload, extract the attributes from the JSON message, and then we'll have two ways of processing this data. So we'll be writing it out to our SQL Server table, and then we'll also be writing it out to our Google Sheets table, which will then be used to sync to our Tableau dashboard. So the first step towards achieving this is connecting Survey123 and FME Server. So Survey123 allows us to connect FME Server every time data is, or allows us to connect FME Server to our data every time a survey is submitted. So with FME Server automations, we can use the webhook trigger that Matt showed in our Flash demo and pick up that webhook message and expose it for further translations and transformations down the line. And once this is set up, then this becomes a fully automated approach. So I'm just going to share my screen and show FME Server and how we have that set up. And what we're looking at here is our automation already built out. We've got our webhook here. This is our webhook trigger. And you can see it's produced a webhook URL. And now what we've done is we've copied this URL and we've gone into our Survey123 app that we've got set up here. And we've already added a webhook that's connecting to that URL. So you can see we have our payload URL. We've got it set up so that every time a new record is submitted, we're going to send through that data. And the next step to our workflow is processing that webhook response. So once that webhook trigger has been triggered and we receive that JSON message, we then need to extract the attributes from our webhook response using the JSON fragmenter and more transformers. We also use the image fetcher to retrieve the images from the survey to then store those as a blob in our tables. We can then write that cleanup data to two locations, our SQL Server table and our Google Sheets table. And here's a little preview of what we can expect our workspace do. So first we get that webhook JSON message, and it's a set of attributes and their values, kind of like key value pairs. And what FME is going to be doing, it's going to be processing those, extracting those attributes and their values, and we'll end up with the table on the bottom there. So we'll move over to our workspace here to show that off. And I'll pull that up. So the first step in our workspace is to retrieve that message from our webhook trigger. So what we've got set up here is a parameter fetcher. And within this, we're retrieving a user parameter that we've set up that will retrieve that webhook feature. We'll then be processing that JSON using the JSON fragmenter and pulling out some of those attributes and the attachments, as well as the geometry. We'll then be using our image fetcher here to extract the image into a raster. We're going to see if it's a JPEG or a PNG. And then we're going to be using our raster extractor to turn this into a blob attribute. At the end here, we're going to be joining all our data back up together with the feature joiner. We'll do some quick cleanup with our attribute manager, such as removing some attributes that we don't need and reformatting. And then we'll be extracting some coordinates to output to our Google Sheets. And here you can see we have our Google Sheets writer, as well as our SQL Server writer. So some of the tips and tricks that we were just showing off there in our workspace is that we can use the JSON fragmenter to easily take that JSON message and extract attributes and their values. It's also important to remember that you need to use the parameter fetcher to actually retrieve the webhook message. Otherwise, it's not going to be available to your workspace. And if you are going to be using the image fetcher, we do need to authenticate it with an ArcGIS Online web connection. Otherwise, we won't be able to retrieve that image as a raster. The last step here is going to be connecting up our automation. So all we have to do is add a action to our automation canvas, and we can set it to a run a workspace action that will run that workspace that I just showed. And that workspace will already be published up to our server. And so that every time a webhook message comes through, it's triggering off that workspace, and that will write out to our two tables. So I'll just show that quickly in our FME server. And you can see I have that action here to run a workspace. We've got the workspace set up here. We've got our connections for our Google Sheets table and our SQL Server. And you can see here we have our webhook feature set up so that this is basically what's coming into the parameter fetcher. So every time a webhook message comes through, it's sending it through this user parameter. And at this point, we can start our automation. So every time we submit a survey, our results will be processed through that workspace. Our last step here is that we want to also integrate with those BI tools. So with FME Server and FME Desktop, you can see we were outputting our data to Google Sheets. And depending on which business intelligence platform you're using, it might depend which format you're outputting your data to. It could be Excel. It could be to another SQL database that your business intelligence tool is able to read. The possibilities are endless with all the formats available to you. And next, I'm just going to show off our kind of the survey in conjunction with FME Server and seeing all of that run at once. So let's go back to our screen share here. And we've already got a survey in Survey123 filled out. So this is a utilities reporting app. So users can report issues within their city, and all that data will get put out to our SQL Server table, as well as our Tableau dashboard that will allow the analysts at the city to easily view all the data being submitted. So we've got an urgency of the issue, we've got a description, we've got our location here, and we've got an image attached, as well as our date. So we'll just check that our automation is running, and it is. So we'll submit that survey. And now that that's submitted, we can go into our automation. We'll take a look at our log. And you can see that our workspace was just triggered. And that's just running in the background right now. All right, so now that we have our results in our Google Sheets, we can go to our Tableau dashboard. And you can see we have just a basic dashboard setup here. We've got a map of all our submissions, as well as a table view, and the total number of reports sorted by urgency. So if I just go to our data and refresh our data set, you should see that we now have a critical urgency report in there, and that's the new one we just submitted. So you can see the location in our map here, and that's what we submitted through our Survey123 app. So yeah, with the power of FME Server and Survey123, you're able to connect your webhooks so that every time a survey is submitted, FME Server runs that workspace, processes that data, and is able to output it to your different tables or destinations. So I'm going to pass it off to Sinai to talk about how you can use FME Server with ArcGIS Field Maps.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. As Dan said, we're going to pivot to a different type of webhook, one that you can use in ArcGIS Online with their other web applications offerings, including Field Maps. So ArcGIS Field Maps is a highly customizable and comprehensive mapping application from Esri. It allows those in the field to easily access and edit and collect data from their mobile devices. It's pretty comprehensive and puts a lot of the functionality that exists between the separate web applications into one place. As you know, there are many types and ways to make a web application in ArcGIS, and they're completely customizable. You may be familiar with some of these on this list. The point of many of these applications are to allow end users to access the feature services underneath them. So feature services are our points, lines, polygons, and other types of features hosted on our ArcGIS platforms. And the best part is we can set up a webhook directly on that feature service to listen for different kinds of events. So if a user adds or edits a point, maybe they upload an attachment, we can be notified the moment or nearly close to the moment that it happens. And that information is sent directly to FME Server. And as we kind of mentioned before, webhooks may differ within each platform. So the feature service webhook functions a little bit differently than Survey123. So instead of sending the event information directly inside the webhook message, like we saw in Dan's demo, a feature service webhook message provides a URL. So it ends up being a multi-step process to extract the event data from the webhook message. But we here at SAFE, we're always interested in automating a workflow. So we've built a custom transformer for extracting that event information from that URL. And it even conveniently sorts it into adds, updates, and deletions. And just want to give a shout out to Matt on this webinar for making this transformer even more awesome. And we're going to be using this transformer in our next demo. So this demo, we'll be using the feature service webhook to solve a pretty common problem. The applications and people responsible for different parts of a workflow are separated and the data isn't communicating between those systems. So we have a work team maybe using one application to collect data, and we have another team that needs to access that data in a separate application in order to do their work. So the challenge is, how do we carry that data from one application to another and let the right people know when it's available? Often we might spend a lot of our own time doing this kind of administrative management work, but in this demo, we're going to automate the entire process with a feature service webhook. So let's dive right in. Okay. So here is our hosted web mapping application in ArcGIS Online. And all these little points on the map here, they're just tracking invasive weeds, which may be just a menace to our own gardens, but they can actually be very devastating to agriculture and crops. So our work crew is using this layer in Field Maps to collect and identify invasive plants. And this data needs to be shared with another team that is responsible for their removal. So to do this, we will set up a feature service webhook on this map. Let's pivot over to FME Server to view our automation. This is our FME Server automation that will receive the event data from that feature service to this webhook trigger here. And we will follow the webhook trigger with a workspace that ingests the data and submits it to the correct team member in our work order system. Finally, our last step is entirely optional, but we're going to send a notification to that employee responsible for completing that work. So just like in Survey123, our webhook trigger actually provides the URL that we can share with ArcGIS Online. However, setting up the feature service webhook is a bit different than in Survey123. Back in ArcGIS Online, we can access our feature service from our web mapping application. And this is the feature service that contains all of our points that our field crew is collecting. And if we scroll to the bottom, we can access more settings for this layer. You just start by selecting admin, and you must have permissions to access these settings. And once you're into admin, you can scroll to the bottom and select webhooks. Now here is where you can create and manage all of your existing webhooks. I've already created one, so let's take a look at what it looks like. I'll open up the edit page. So we just have to give our webhook a name, and then we can tell ArcGIS Online what kinds of changes that we want to track. So this is all in the documentation for webhooks, which we can share with the audience. But essentially, you're given different options for different kinds of activities that we want event data sent to FME Server for. So in this case, I'm only interested in getting information on which features are being created and updated. And in our next part here, the hook URL, this is how we connect this webhook to FME Server. So you might recognize this URL. What it's doing is connecting directly to this automation here. And this is the URL that I've copied from our automation and pasted it here so that they're able to communicate. The rest of this webhook configuration is just setting up the content type. This looks a little bit more REST API if you're familiar with those, but you can essentially leave these default. To learn more about the details of setting up a webhook on a feature service, we can share out the tutorial for a step-by-step guide. So now that we've configured our feature service webhook, ArcGIS will send a message to this automation for every new feature created and updated. Our trigger here will then pass that webhook payload into our workspace action. So let's take a look at that workspace that follows our webhook trigger message to get an idea of the type of things that we can do with our webhook data. So here we are in FME Workbench, and we'll just walk through this workspace at a very high level. But we start this workflow by passing the payload into the ArcGIS Online Data Getter. Now this is the custom transformer that we mentioned before. And you can see just how simple it is to use. We just need to use our web connection to ArcGIS Online, as well as pass in the value for that webhook payload. And what it does is it returns all of the updates from that URL that the webhook provides, and adds updates and deletions. And you might recognize this as JSON formatting. And we know now that we can easily handle all of our JSON objects with our JSON transformers in FME Workbench. We've flattened out that webhook message into attributes that we can now use and pass on to our different systems. So in our next step here, we're just comparing the points that our field crew has collected, and we're comparing that point to some of our county shapefiles that we might host somewhere else. And we're just doing this in order to determine its jurisdiction. So we'll do that with a spatial filter and assign it a location on our county map. And then once we have that spatial information, we're able to find out which employee is responsible for that area by joining our point to the employee management database. And again, this might be hosted on another separate database, or maybe it's in a REST API. The point is we can take that point and it's been enriched, and now we can find out who's actually responsible for removing that lead. In our last step, we want to submit that now to our work order management database. We know who's responsible, we know where the point is, and we can now create a work order for the next steps in the workflow. And we will again write that to a database on another system, and we can connect to databases with a database connection in FME Workbench. The final and optional step here is to build a notification for that person responsible for carrying out the work. And how we do that is using just an HTML report generator. This will create a message for us that has some nice editing, that kind of thing. And we can pass that message as well as the employee contact information that we pulled from the database in previous steps, and pass it back into the automation so that we can send out that notification. So essentially what we've done is just in a few steps and a few seconds of processing, we're going to connect our submitted points to other data sets in other databases or files stored elsewhere to give it context, and then we're going to synchronize that information across systems. Now, just to recap, we're going to run through this workflow. We're going to submit a point in our web map. The webhook trigger will ingest it, pass it on to our workspace, which will then assign it to the correct employee and submit a work order for that employee. Lastly, we pass in our email body and the employee contact information into an email action so that they can be notified of that new work. All that's left to do is try it out. So let's go over to our web map. And let's pretend that we are collecting a point from Field Maps on our mobile device. So I'll just zoom right in and drop a new feature. Just add some values here. Let's say I have some weeds on my front lawn. And once I create that point, it may take a few moments for it to reach our automation. And that's configurable actually within the webhook. So once we've submitted that point, what we can do is take a look for its arrival in our automation log file. And we can see here we have some events being recorded, and this is our webhook message incoming from ArcGIS Online. And what we can see here is our service name. So there's our feature service, and then we have that URL that contains information about those changes. So after that, our automation runs that workspace and sends out our email to the employee responsible. So if I check my inbox, now we see we have a new email for that work order that we just submitted from our web application. Okay, so that kind of shows you how you can connect feature service to other applications, enrich that data, transform it, send out notifications, whatever you'd like, using webhooks and FME server automations. We submitted that point from just a web mapping application in ArcGIS Online, but that would work in exactly the same way if you have employees using Field Maps, Collector, Quick Capture, those kind of applications as well. Okay, so just to recap some tips and tricks from that demo, just some things to keep in mind. Some of it is more administrative, others are just things that might make your life a little bit easier. In order to set up a webhook, your ArcGIS Online account must have permissions to the administrative settings on that feature service. You also have to configure some settings to make sure that edits can be tracked on that feature service. Again, refer to our tutorial just which settings need to be updated. Please do feel free to download that ArcGIS Online Webhook data getter from the FME Hub. That's going to make your life a lot easier. We're going to be able to pull the changes out of that URL automatically. And lastly, webhooks in ArcGIS Online and Portal are not just limited to feature services. You can listen for all kinds of events, including user activity, group activity, administrative changes, that kind of thing. Definitely look into those if that's something that might be useful to you. We've covered a lot today. I hope it was informative and useful. Definitely, if you have access to ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Portal, please take some of our tutorials or watch this webinar back and set up those workflows on your own feature services or web mapping applications. Webhooks really allow you to take your ArcGIS Online data and extend it to other platforms, do all sorts of cool things. Feature updates are, again, just one type of event workflows you can look for. Definitely check the documentation for more options. Next steps, if you're not already using FME, please head to our website, safe.com/support/demos, and download your free trial for FME Workbench and Server. Take some of these tutorials that we'll share in the following slides and customize them to your own workflows and let us know what you're up to, post to the community, or just give us a shout. We'd love to see what you're up to. And here are some of those resources. We have some videos for doing webhooks in both Survey123 and Field Maps. And then following there, those articles and blog posts for more information. And I'll pass it on to Elizabeth now.
Awesome, thanks, Sinai. So as a thank you for everyone joining us today, we do have a community badge that you can redeem in the FME community. If you are not a part of the FME community, we definitely encourage you to check it out. It's a great forum for connecting with other data users and FME experts as well. So the code today is LGWBS, and I will drop that in the chat here. Our peak of data integration, our 2022 UC, is just around the corner, I think about 3 weeks out from today. So if you have yet to register, we encourage you to do so. It's going to be a hoot, and we can't wait to see you all in Vancouver. Check out our upcoming and on-demand webinars. We have a lot of great content available on demand, safe.com/webinars, as well as a lot of great webinars coming up. If you have a moment to contribute a Gartner Peer Insight review, we really appreciate any feedback on folks' experience with FME. And I will drop that link in the chat here as well. All right, and with that, it does look like we have a little bit of time remaining for some Q&A here. So I'll get our presenters and myself will turn back on our webcams and we can take some questions live from the audience. Yeah, a lot of great questions that came in today. So thank you everyone who was able to drop a question into the questions panel here. And we'll take a look through. All right, and yeah, if you do see any questions relevant to you and you haven't upvoted them yet, definitely do that as well. That helps us organize ourselves here. And do our presenters see any that would be a good fit to start with?
Yeah, I think it would be good to start with just a couple questions that came in is, do you require FME server to use webhooks? And the answer to that is yes. We require FME server automations to connect webhooks from other applications. This is because FME server has access to the web, and we need that access in order for other applications to communicate. These kind of workflows are not possible with just Workbench. You'll need both platforms.
Another question that's come up a few times is around ArcGIS Enterprise Portal. And yes, there are webhooks for Enterprise Portal. We didn't cover them in the session today. They're architected a little differently, and currently, or until very recently, we're just at the organization level. So you could set up webhooks around things like users and groups. However, as Sinai has shared in the questions, ESRI has recently added feature service webhooks to Portal, but they are currently in beta. So we will investigate those and look for some articles to come in the future on those.
Yeah, it might be something to keep in mind for another webinar in the future. We'll see.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
If you're interested in an enterprise webhook webinar, definitely let us know. This kind of feedback is really important to us. Yeah.
Awesome. It's always a good problem when there's a lot of questions to scroll through. So.
Yeah. I'll just pick one. Yeah, so we have a question here. Does the Survey123 Webhook trigger does it fire only when a survey is submitted? Or can we get other kinds of events on Survey123? And the answer to that is we can set up a Survey123 webhook to listen for different kinds of events about that survey, just like the feature service webhooks. I believe the options should be in this settings there for the survey. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Dan. But yeah, we can.
Yeah, I think you can also, there's another box to tick off, which is existing record edited. So you can also use that if you're looking to watch for those, and then that'll send off a webhook message as well.
Yeah. And when you're setting up those webhooks, you can also choose what information about that submission you're interested in. So maybe you're not interested in the point or feature itself. Maybe you're interested in who is submitting the survey or which survey that information is coming from. You can send metadata like that as well. But it's limited, I guess, in comparison to feature service webhooks, just because Survey123 is a specific web application with more limited function. A couple of people asking, what version of FME do you need to use webhooks? And I believe Webhook Trigger was released in 2020, .0. So you'll need at least FME Server 2020 in order to set up these kinds of workflows. And will the ArcGIS Online Webhook Data Getter custom transformer, will that work with Portal? It will not. This is set up just for ArcGIS Online. So if you're looking to ingest Portal webhooks, that won't be compatible. You'll need to probably set up a pretty similar workflow. And the great thing about custom transformers is you can actually open them up and take a look inside. So I haven't worked much with Portal webhooks before, but that custom transformer might be a good prototype if you're looking to kind of replicate the same workflows.
Milton asked, when creating a webhook in the feature server, what is the schedule section for? So yeah, the feature service webhooks are not entirely real time. You'll see that there is a seconds interval you can add when or change when configuring them to tweak for performance. Perhaps if a webhook is being fired too often, you might want to increase the polling number a little bit so that you might receive, when you use our ArcGIS Online Webhook Data Getter, you might end up getting 5 or 6 ads that have happened within the last 5 seconds or 10 seconds. I think it defaults to 20 or 30 seconds. and that can be changed.
Yeah, another good question here or mention is that using the logs to kind of view that webhook message coming in. And this is something that we didn't really go in depth in because just of the time limitations for today, but I'll send a link to one of our articles that actually goes a bit more in depth about how you can use the log in FME server to kind of take a look at that webhook message, and then you can set up your JSON response accordingly and parse that message. So yeah, it's just that article there that I've sent. Another question is FME server prioritizing the processing of webhooks? I would think that FME server, just the order that it comes in is how it's going to be processed. And if you have if it kicks off a job on FME server, it just depends on how many engines you have and whether or not those engines are being taken up by existing jobs. And it'll just add those to the queue and then take that webhook message and process it through your workspace once an engine's free.
Yeah. And it's a bit off topic, but if you're interested in prioritizing jobs and engines, there is queue control available for FME server. So you can set specific jobs to go front of the line if you have something that's high priority, or dedicate a specific engine just for processing maybe webhook messages that are coming in. There's lots of options for that, but maybe that's for another webinar.
Should also maybe mention that during some testing, I think you were doing, Sinai, on a feature service that was enabled for public data collection, that the webhooks, instead of coming very quickly, they were coming. We saw a much lower response time. So just something to keep in mind if your feature service has public data collection enabled, your webhooks might arrive much slower.
Yeah. I don't know too much about the specifics there, but it does seem a publicly available hosted feature service has some latency in relaying those messages. So that might be something public facing for your organization, though those are less common workflows that I see, but it still works. It just might be a little slower on the Esri side of things. Yeah, good point. And I have a question here. Can we just push the JSON from the webhook into an email raw? Yeah, you definitely could do that. So if you're not interested in parsing that data from the survey or feature service and doing any transformations there, you could just connect your webhook trigger to an email action in an automation and just send a notification with a raw JSON. You'll just have to be adept at reading JSON, which some of us are when you work with it often. So that's definitely possible. You don't need to do anything more than that.
All right, it does look like we've gotten to most questions. Does the team see any others outstanding we may want to address?
There's a question about licensing. It's just kind of a general question about if you're using an Esri Enterprise Geodatabase, what FME license do you need? If you're using, say, SDE, or you want the full file geodatabase reader and writer, then you'll need the Esri license for FME. But I believe if you're reading, you can still you can use the OpenAPI reader for file geodatabase as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one more question that I'll squeeze in if we have time. Somebody's asking if they could use webhooks to synchronize maybe their production and test servers. And yeah, this is definitely a use case that you can use webhooks to synchronize those databases. Basically in real time. You don't have to set up a schedule to synchronize those. I've done bidirectional synchronization this way. You have webhooks on either end, one on the database, one on ArcGIS, or on both ArcGIS, and those messages are relayed between each other and keep both data sets up to date, like I said, nearly in real time. So that's a great example of using webhooks.
All right, and before we conclude, I will just mention as well that if you do have any other questions come up or you just like to talk to us about anything data, definitely shoot us an email after the webinar, info@safe.com. And we'll also stay online a couple minutes post-webinar just in case any last-minute questions come in, and we'll send the back end for that. And just final call for our presenters. Any other questions that we want to address before we wrap things up here? No? Silence is
No, I think
we're good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Lots of great questions today, though.
Yeah, appreciate it.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Big thank you to our team of presenters here today, and to Matt, especially for his first webinar with us. It was a fantastic time working with you.
Thank you. I'm sorry about the audio issues. Again, learning for next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And big thank you to our whole audience for attending this morning. I know Hannah has just dropped a link in the chat for the webinar survey. If you do have a minute to fill that out, it's just a couple multiple choice questions, and we really appreciate any feedback. And with that, we really hope that you all have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Good one. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.